From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas and Stunning Digital Marketing. In this podcast, I sit down with author KGE Konkel, and we talk about his new book, Who Has Buried the Dead? You really want to hear this interesting interview. And grab a drink and sit back and relax and enjoy it. This episode of the SDM Show is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. And today I'm going to do something a little special. I'm here with my guest, KGE Konkel, and we're going to talk about his new book, Who Has Buried the Dead? How are you today?
I'm fantastic. I couldn't hope to be better. Looking forward to all the Christmas hush and bush and rambling around the holiday season. Happy Hanukkah, all those out there this fall in Christmas. And it's the time to be sad, but the time to be happy. I'm happy. I'm alive.
No, I will. And your story is a pretty compelling story. You've gone through a bit of a health battle. Do you want to share it a little bit?
Well, in terms of health, I mean, I was healthy. I've been a police officer for a long time, almost a quarter of a century, more than a quarter of a century, close to 45 years here in the Royal Hong Kong Police. And I was in Abu Dhabi, or was it maybe Romania? I don't remember what country, but my family doctor says, come home. I said, I'm not coming home. I'm on vacation, bud. I need a holiday. And he said, you better, it's urgent. So I did what every normal person does. I waited till my holiday ended and then I went home. And he says, we have a small problem. We thought it was kidney stones, but it's a GIST, global intestinal strombolic tumor. And we get rid of it. I said, that's great. So we had surgery. And then 2 months later, he says, well, we screwed up. And I said, what are we going to do? He said, well, you can sue me. I said, I'm not in the business of suing. Let's work together and make it work. Let's get rid of it. Okay, so I had 7 hours. It had metastasized by that time to all parts of the liver, all 4 segments, and they weren't successful as they wanted to be. And so I was given a very short period of time to live, less than 2 months. And so that's called oh boy, this I need like a hole in the head. But I've survived 3 major surgeries, 2 X-ray embolizations, and 53 chemo treatments. I go to work after every chemo the same day. That does not make me extraordinary. I think that makes me typically Canadian. I have friends in Europe who say, how do you do it? I say, simple. Watch these Canadians in T-shirts shoveling snow off the roofs of their cars. And that's how we do it. That's how we live. We just get over it.
No, it's so true. And the interesting thing about all this is you wrote a lot of this book while you were facing those surgeries and facing those chemo treatments.
That is correct. Because I had 3 previous books that were extremely well received nationally, internationally, and movie options here and there and everything else. And then I hadn't written for a while. I'd done stories for military magazines because I have a great deal of affection for history. And the best thing therapy to someone who's sitting in a room and not watching Netflix and saying, well, I'm going to work and I'm going to work, is actually started writing. And I'd had some rough drafts, some ideas, and it evolved into this, I think, a really good thriller, which is a spy and murder mystery and top secrets of the world thriller. It's really a World War II thriller, which has morphed into what's happening in Ukraine today.
Yeah. And how did your affection for history start? I find that's interesting because I don't know if I've ever shared with you, but I have that same affection for history, believe it or not. So I love history. So how did yours start?
The famous author Faulkner put it best. He says, the past is not dead. It isn't even past yet. So coming from the age I am, which is on the sunny side of 70, maybe 60, depending on the day, and still working as a police officer, I have to look at what the history doesn't start in 1990, Lord knows. So, it doesn't start in 1800. You have to look at the personalities that make the world what it is today and the character types. And the fascination I have is with the human species and how we evolve and devolve at the same time. I mean, every time there's this big thing called the downer. It's a world war or it's a plague. And we somehow we adapt to it. And part of my love of history is just watching not all the goody news of what they wore in the 1800s, as much as how did they survive, how do they adapt. And history to me has always been this analysis of how people adapt to crises, because I think that resilience is very critical to the human species.
And it's really interesting when you look at this mess that's going on overseas, if you want to call it, that history has a tendency to repeat itself, doesn't it? It's almost like we're not even learning from what's going on.
This is no different than Spain, and we'd fight one of those wars that we actually didn't fight. We'd have we play the part of supplying the arms, and they'll fight the war. But very recently, I think the last few weeks, there's been this American TV series where these people go deep under, and all of a sudden the Swedes and the Finns and Norwegians are finding all their spies in their midst, and they've been there for 20 years. So, Yeltsin and Glasnost and Perestroika is not the way that Russia sees itself. It's not the way Stalin saw it. It's not the way that Putin sees it. They have a pan-European vision. It's not evil. The Russian people are not bad. I really emphasize that. I've been executed with search warrants in Moscow, the only Canadian police officer to do that. I trained the National Police of Poland. I was warned by my good friends in the West to leave because it was getting very dangerous. I was actually the personal assistant to a man named Mark Papala, who was the commissioner of the Polish National Police. And we were talking about organized crime, in parentheses, from east of Poland, let's put it that way. So Russian organized crime. And when I looked at that, I realized that oh boy, this is getting heavy. And I then was told by my Canadian embassy personnel to leave. And then I listened to. And 3 or 4 weeks after I left, Mark Papala was assassinated by the Russian mob. And, there's so many things that are on the dark side that we sort of gloss over. And the problem with the Russian phenomena is Stalin has created this concept of having a Russified Europe. And where he'd have those outer states of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, you name it. They were all buffer states to protect the Russia that Stalin saw as important. Putin's doing the same thing, but I think Putin is not as foolhardy as Stalin, because I think Putin plays the long game. I do not believe Vladimir Putin is necessarily crazy. I don't think he has COVID. I think that it's a propaganda game. He's a very shrewd customer, and we have to be careful. The threats he makes are part of a large chess game, and the Russians are masters of chess. They're a highly intelligent nation, and we're dishonest if we believe that somehow high tech is going to beat human intelligence, because high tech doesn't always win battles. We found that out in Vietnam. We found that out in Iraq. We found that out recently in Afghanistan. High tech does not beat human willpower and human intellect. So, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's so true. High tech isn't always the answer, but then you look at the reality of this war that's going on, that your book kind of mirrors what's going on today. And you do have high tech involved. The latest reports, as of the time of this record, is we now have drones involved in this war, which we
were thinking drones and policing years ago, but it was against privacy laws. how innocent we were. I want to remind people that as far as Russia is concerned, and I talk a lot about the Battle of Sebastopol in the book, and the growth of Zhukov and Daria, and the dark side of Kim Philby and the spies. If you want to look at a potboiler who is buried the dead is the great pot boilers overflowing with mystery and intrigue. But the point you have to remember, the real part of the book is there are 12 hero cities in the Soviet Union. They are cities which are like the civilian plus military survived fascism. They like Stalingrad, Volgograd, and 4 of those 12 cities are in Crimea. Sebastopol's one of them, right? And they are not anathema to the Russian psyche. As far as the Russian leadership is concerned, they bled for that land. Ergo, they've earned it, and they should have it back.
Yeah. It's really interesting what's gone on over in Russia. We had the Soviet Union coming out of the war, and then we had all the issues with the communist countries. I have heritage back to communist Yugoslavia, believe it or not.
How can you survive?
Yeah, well, my grandfather came over out of Yugoslavia when he was young, and in those days, what would happen is the male would come over, and the wife wouldn't always come over right away. So if you look at my mom's family, there was 2 born in Yugoslavia, which is now Serbia, and the other 5 were born here in Canada, which is more interesting. And things have changed. And then we saw the advent of the Berlin Wall coming down. We saw the advent of all the Russian states becoming independent. And now Russia's running around trying to gobble them back up and rebuild their empire, so to speak. It's just really interesting. I should have been a map drawer in Europe, to be honest with you. I'd be rich right now, I think.
Remember what they said in Tale of Two Cities: it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And for me, as a police officer, crime has never been more complex. As a writer, because I know on Canada's only police writer who's a popular author. But as a writer, I look at the world as it's unfolding. And I say, we've been here before. Maybe not this century, but we've been here before. Every time we move 2 steps forward, we seem to stumble. And we have to have faith in our strength as people to overcome not only adversity, but evil. And I think people are trying to socialize it and say it's psychological and blah, 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 blah. It's not. There is evil in the world. And I say that as one who in my profession has actually seen it. And I don't mean it's like a palpable thing. It's like a video game. So there's evil, but there is people who are innately evil. I wouldn't put Putin in that category, but some of his henchmen, some of Stalin's henchmen were evil, like Beria with some of the Sharids, with the NKVD, and with the current FSB, who kill people in English parks by putting syringes into them. I mean, come on, where does this begin? Where does this end? And we've been too laissez-faire. That's an anomaly. It doesn't happen every day. But I say this to my Russian friends. I said, it's not you that I'm angry with. It's the fact you're not getting the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Is democracy flawed? Inherently flawed. But I can sit here and talk to you, and you can hear me, and you have an audience that will listen and agree and disagree and discuss. And one of the great things that makes us 2-legged mammals is the fact we have a brain and the capacity to have free will. When you take away that free will, you take away most of the species that we call humanity.
Yeah, it's so true. I'll share with you another bit of a story, just because we're talking about Russia, and I just find it interesting. I had the pleasure as a young boy studying Russian geography.
Wow.
When I went to school in Quebec as a grade 10 student. It was one of the things they covered in geography was a unit about Russia. And at that time, Russia still had all the states together.
Yes.
And we actually did a unit where we represented each of a Russian state. And I drew Kazakhstan. And by research, back in 1983, I discovered that Kazakhstan at the time was very oil rich,
yes,
very resource rich. And what did I do? The unthinkable. I threatened to leave the Russian Union and start my own country in 1983. And I only...
What a game risk that would be. Like we used to play at university, those risk games. I'm leaving, he said. Well, the other 12 parts of the USSR are going, no, you're not.
And I share that story because, in essence, that's what happened. All these states like Kazakhstan and the Ukraine and all these other states said, yes, we are. And that's what happened. And then we have today what's going on in the world, where we know what's going on in the Ukraine. It's, as I say, a bit of a mess. It's a bit of a concern because Ukraine is oil rich and Ukraine is very technology rich state. And most people don't, a lot of people forget about the technology part of the business, but there's a lot of high tech in the Ukraine, believe it or not.
They're very sophisticated. When I was doing some investigation into Russian generals and things I don't want to talk about necessarily, even after 30 years, 20 years, because of certain confidentialities I have under oath. But I learned then that some of the best scientists in the field of missile technology, some of the best gemologists in terms of the various samples of oil soils that make up, that complement speed, create velocity for aircraft. I mean, in spite of the fact we have this predilection to believe that Ukrainians are just peasants and farmers, and look at it, it's not golden sunsets, and they sing wonderful songs, they're very moody, and there's the Volga and blah, blah, blah. The reality is they're highly sophisticated and very independent people. And you can't put a rein on intelligence and a desire for independence. You can make it mediocre. That's the bane of our existence, is mediocrity, not trying to reach for the stars. And that's the problem we face in the Western world. And where Putin is single-minded, he's got this whole hinterland of middle. When Germany tried to take over, Nazis tried to take over Russia, it was Father Winter that killed the Wehrmacht. Now I think it's the power that Putin has over the media. He has a vast majority of people who hearken back to a more simpler age. It's not like John Boy saying goodbye, good night, Opie, good night, all these wonderful little euphemisms we have on television here in the West. But they actually fought a horrible war and survived. And they feel slighted by the West. As far as they're concerned, the war started in 1941. The secret pacts they signed in 39-41 that gobbled up all the little countries and occupied Poland and all the Baltic states. Well, that doesn't matter. That's part of what Russia is and will be as far as they're concerned. Their war is a shortened war. There's the Glorious War. They're the only ones who fought against the Allies, which is actually historically wrong. And there are stated facts that it wasn't just the Russians who defeated the armies of Nazis, but it was also the air war in the West that took away the aircraft which would have supported the Wehrmacht in the East. And they were brought home to defend the Fatherland, the German homeland, from day and night bombings. So it's a very complex thing when you look at an egg and say, is it square or is it round? And as far as the Russians are concerned, there's only one egg, and it's sitting in St. Petersburg, and it's beautiful, and there's no other egg.
Yeah, it's so true. Who should read this book, really? I know history buffs, certainly. World War II.
I think the book is unique insofar as I know a lot of historians like it, the university types like it, and World War II history fans like, if there's a fan to war, but aficionados like it. But I think it's good for young people to read, because we have to have a sense of history. And when people talk about a war, they say, well, it's far off. And real wars have long legs. The final burst is the first salvo was fought 50 years before the final outburst. And so we try to make war sound like a 60-minute TV show with commercials. And no wars that are real wars are easy. That's why I think, for example, people have asked me, I had reporters ask me, what's going to be the end of the war? I think if we are lucky, we'll have a stalemate with neither side claiming defeat, and have like a very, very difficult time separating the two, much the same as China and India, the Suez, all these little things that really festered and have the potential of great violence. And so I think the same in Ukraine and Eastern Europe and Russia. And I think that Who Has Buried the Dead pretty well gives people a very historically accurate, because remember, I think I'm the only thriller ever written with 100 books as a bibliography that I've had to read to do the research. And some of them are like 2,000 pages long, because I wanted to make sure everything was accurate. So the one thing people who like history, but like detail, but also like to fall into the past and understand it better, would love to read Who Has Buried the Dead.
Yeah, so true. I mean, in historical fiction, I think detail is everything. I'm thinking as you were talking about saying how you did the research, and another author that comes to mind is a gentleman by the name of John Jakes. He is famous for writing North and South and that whole trilogy.
Yes.
And I think of John and having read his books, and he's got several other books about the colonial times and the families in American history, and his books are very detailed. And then I draw the parallel with your book, how it is also very detailed. And I think the secret sauce in historical fiction is that detail, to be honest.
Well, that's what makes a good police officer, isn't it? So is every good police officer a good writer? Well, they better be honest with themselves and always preach a degree of honesty in their writing, much the same as I do when I get in the witness box. You strive for truth, you strive for accuracy, and you try to keep your personal integrity intact throughout this little chase for the perfect word. And every writer chases for that one word. I hate to tell you what it is. In my first book, it was actually a vermilion sunset. And that sort of went, wow, I gotcha. Right? Because I've never heard that said before. It was like a flamingo tinged sunset. And that worked for a whole chapter because it motivated me to write better as a writer, because, writers are weird ducks anyway.
I know. My brother's one, so I get that. And it's funny because as I listen to you talk about the book, I can actually picture what you're saying. And to me, that makes it a compelling story. I'm an avid reader. I read a book a week without failure. I've been doing this for many, many years. Some wise person told me once, give up an hour of TV and spend that hour reading a book and you'd be richer than most people in the world. So I've always kind of gone that mantra. And I know when I read stories or historical stories or any books, the best ones are the ones that paint the picture. And I'm listening to you as we kind of go through this interview, and you're painting that picture. And I think that's what makes this a compelling book to read.
Well, you're very kind. And I think it's important I want to have young people start to read again.
Yeah.
Because my problem is when young people are on TikTok or they're on Netflix or on Zoom, and they're actually, their brains are not working. You're not functioning. You're not engaging.
Yeah.
And when I hear that, for example, cursory writing is out of the classroom, and I'm not an old duck, trust me. People say, well, you're old fashioned. I go, listen, I was at the university when the first computers came out. I mastered what 4, what 5, and I was good. And then I went through all these metamorphoses of Apple and Mac, and I'm changing with the times. So, don't look at me and say, well, was this guy? No, I've been through so many changes in my lifetime that these young folks have not even begun to realize that life is about change. It's not the perfect generation. We certainly weren't and aren't. But I think reading helps us put everything into perspective. And it is a form of escapism. Of course it is. But it's really a healthy escapism because you're acting in your brain. You're not being passive.
Yeah. One of my best friends just retired as being an educator, teaching middle school kids, grade 7, after 30 years in July and in June. And she will tell you that, the reading and the lack of reading is a big problem with the kids today. So I 100% agree with you. And I actually developed my skill of reading, believe it or not, from a boys series called The Hardy Boys as a young boy. Yeah. That's where I started. And my father was a reader when he was alive. My grandparents were both readers. My mom, not so much. But in our family, I come from a family of 4 boys, and 2 of us are very heavy readers and 2 of us are not. And I think many times the 2 of us that are probably better off than most people, to be honest with you.
Well, we came went to Canada as displaced persons after the war as refugees. My mom was Dutch, my father Polish. And my father taught himself to read English and speak English by getting up a newspaper. And I spoke Cantonese in Hong Kong. I was quite fluent. And people said, how did you do that? I said, well, there isn't much choice. If you want to eat, you have to learn how to order food. And you can point at the menu only so many times. And after a while, everything is logical. And the inherent logic of reading and the inherent logic of utilizing your brain, every time you use your brain, it revivifies. It builds the capacity of your brain. And sitting passively watching, and I'm not saying Netflix, or I don't want to malign any product, but watching actors do this, realize they themselves had to learn and memorize lines, and there's a plot, there's a script, and we can either be passive or we can be active. Now, that doesn't mean everyone's going to be a writer, but you'll sure enjoy life more if you do read.
Yeah, that's so true. And the best way to understand how the world is shaped is to read books like this one, because it gives you some insight into what has happened, why it's happened, where it's happened, and what we need to do to improve society moving forward.
And the footnote of the book is the last great secret of the Second World War, and you get to know what it is. I'm not telling you. Why would you buy a book if you knew the secret? But it's fascinating how I taught myself how to read and write, and then I developed the capacity to think and utilize that. Then I expanded that to say, what if, and so then it became logical. And I said, okay, in those circumstances, how does this work? And so that's almost a childlike fascination I have with the capacity people have to utilize those skill sets. It's a horrible, sad commentary on somebody that they don't know that. It doesn't matter if you go to university or high school or community college. It doesn't matter if you work at McDonald's. Reading is not an escape. Reading is actually building your intellectual capacity as a human being. So you can discuss things. You can disagree with people. You're not just a sheep. You don't want to be sheep in a democratic society. You don't want to be, we'll get 3% of that vote or 4% of that vote. They'll always vote for us because they don't know any better. That's an insult to a human being.
No, I would 100% agree with you. Thanks for talking about your book today. I would suggest you go out and get it. Who Has Buried the Dead? It's available on Amazon. It's available on Barnes & Nobles in States, Amazon in Canada and US.
Chapters.
And anywhere else? Any big books?
No, it's only been out recently because most of the books have there's been serious. I hate the cliche supply issues. A lot of the firms that used to do binding for books have gone out of business. So how do you bind a book? It's so simple, but how do you bind the backing of a book? How do you put those pages together? The print industry has been decimated. So getting the book out when we did, we were very fortunate. I'm running a race to get the book out. It's out there finally, and I'm very happy with my publisher, which is a very good Omni Publications International. They do a lot of good work. It's the first book they've ever done because they basically do thought pieces and political things, and they take different viewpoints on things, and they're very well written and well thought. But this is the first jump they've got into the world of fiction and thrillers. And I said, but it's not really a jump because the book is about politics and life. And that seems to be the undercurrent that moves us all. So I encourage people to go out, buy the book. It's good for Christmas. It'll be out there after Christmas. It's going into the States big time in the spring. Ed Carson, I'll name him, was the president of 3 major Canadian publishing firms. He's just retired. I gave him a copy to read. He says, this has all the makings of an international bestseller. And I don't say that for my personal gain. I'm just so happy.
Yeah. And if you want to find more about the book, feel free to go to whohasburiedthedead.com.
Yes.
And you'll find all the press releases, some information about our amazing author. You'll find some information about the book, as well as links on where you can purchase that book. So I would suggest going on over there. It's kind of all in one place to make it nice and easy for you, the listener, to read this book. So good luck with the book, and thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for allowing me to be with you.
Thank you. Hey, it's okay. So, mm, so that was. Hey, sorry, I was on with client. What's up? I was on with client. I told you that at 4 o'clock. So, bye. Yeah, bye. Fuck. I don't want to hear. Bye. Fuck. I have work to do. That's not fun. I don't give a shit. What was I going to do? There you go. Hey. This episode of the SDM Show is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey, everybody. Rob here again. I want to thank KGE Konkel for joining me on this edition of the SDM Show, talking about his great book, Who Has Buried the Dead. You can get the book at any major bookstore. Go on over to whohasburiedthedead.com for links so you can purchase the book now. Thank you for listening to this edition of the SDM Show. The SDM Show is brought to you by Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing. For more information about Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing, go to stunningdigitalmarketing.info. From here, you can connect to us on social media, go to our website, and even go to the podcast to subscribe. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. Keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. Make your business succeed.